Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the narrow streets of ancient Rome, where the sky is just beginning to pale and the city exhales its first smoky breath of the day. You open your eyes not to an alarm clock, but to shouting downstairs, the clatter of clay pots, and the distant bray of a mule that sounds like it, too, regrets existing. You are lying on a thin mattress in a cramped upper floor room of an insula, a Roman apartment block stacked high and built fast, the kind of place that sways ever so slightly when a cart rumbles by. Dust floats in the air, catching the early light. Somewhere nearby, bread is already baking, and somewhere else something is already burning. Welcome to Rome. You probably won't survive this, at least not comfortably. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling everyone where you're listening from and what time it is there. Are you drifting off in the middle of the night, or sneaking this in during a lazy afternoon? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift on the mattress, which is stuffed with straw that has seen better decades, and consider your situation. The room is barely large enough to sit up in. Your belongings are few: a tunic folded at your side, sandals by the wall, and a small oil lamp that has burned low overnight. Romans rise early, partly because there's so much to do, and partly because sleeping in an insula after sunrise is like trying to nap inside a drum. Noise travels. Walls are thin. Privacy is a modern luxury you won't enjoy today. You listen as the building wakes. Below you, someone curses while hauling water upstairs. Most insulae don't have running water, despite what travel brochures from 2,000 years later might imply. The mainstream historical fact is this: only the ground floors of many apartment buildings had direct water access, while upper floors relied on carrying it by hand. That means every day begins with effort, and sometimes with spilled buckets and arguments on the stairs. Historians still argue whether this inconvenience actually improved community bonds or just made everyone permanently annoyed. You swing your legs over the edge of the bed and stand, careful not to bump your head on the low ceiling beam. Outside your narrow window, the Subura district is already alive. This is one of Rome's densest neighborhoods, packed with shops, taverns, workshops, and people who mind your business almost as much as their own. The smell is unmistakable: egg smoke from cooking fires, stale urine from last night's full chamber pots, and the earthy sweetness of figs being unloaded from a cart. It's not pleasant, but it's real, and after a few breaths, your nose gives up complaining. As you pull on your tunic, you notice how worn it feels. Clothing in Rome is simple but meaningful. Even at dawn, status matters. The cut, the color, the cleanliness. Everything signals who you are before you even speak. You tie the belt at your waist and think about how little protection this outfit offers against cold, heat, or judgment. Still, it's what you have, and at least you're free. Not everyone you'll see today can say that. You step into the stairwell, joining the daily migration downward. The stairs creak under decades of use, and you instinctively hug the wall as someone else squeezes past you going up, already panting. There's a fringe tidbit that always surprises modern listeners. Many Romans slept with their valuables tied to their bodies or hidden in shoes, because theft inside apartment buildings was that common. You do a quick mental check. Nothing to steal, so at least that's one problem solved. Small victories count here. At the bottom, you push open the door and spill into the street. The Subura at dawn is a performance in motion. Vendors are setting up wooden stalls, shouting to one another in hoarse voices. A woman dumps the contents of a chamber pot into the gutter, yelling a warning that may or may not be sincere. You flatten yourself against a wall just in time, learning your first survival rule of Roman urban life: always listen for splashing sounds from above. Remember this, it comes up again. You walk carefully along the uneven paving stones. aware that beneath your sandals is a mix of mud, refuse, and whatever else yesterday left behind. Rome has drains famously, but they are overwhelmed by the sheer number of people. The Cloaca Maxima is an engineering marvel, yes, but it doesn't magically make the streets clean. Historians still argue whether Rome was actually filthier than other ancient cities, or if it just gets more blame because we know it better. As the sun lifts higher, light bounces off plastered walls painted with faded reds and yellows. Political slogans and crude drawings are scratched into the surfaces, some endorsing candidates, others just endorsing boredom. You pause to read one, then realize reading graffiti before breakfast is probably not a great life strategy. A cart rattles past, its wheels screaming like angry birds, and you step aside, heart racing more than necessary. Day one, and you're already jumpy. Understandable. You notice how young the city feels. Children run errands barefoot. Older men lean on canes, already debating something loudly. There's laughter, coughing, spitting, bargaining. Rome is estimated to have over 1 million inhabitants at its peak. A staggering fact for the ancient world. That density creates energy, but also risk. Fire, disease, collapse. You glance up at the stacked buildings and try not to think about how often insulae collapse due to shoddy construction and greedy landlords. There's a reason Roman poets complain about sleeping with one eye open. You inhale, steadying yourself. This is just the beginning of the day. You haven't even eaten yet, and already you've avoided falling debris, suspicious liquids, and minor stampedes. Not bad. You start walking with a bit more confidence now, blending into the flow. For the moment, you're just another body in the city, another tunic in motion, another heartbeat Rome barely notices. And that, oddly, is comforting. As the morning hum grows louder and the sun warms your shoulders, you take your first true steps into Roman life, unaware of how many times today you'll think, very seriously, that probably could have killed me. But for now, you're upright, breathing and moving forward, and in this city, that counts as a successful start. You realize quickly that survival runs on fuel, and in Rome, fuel means breakfast, simple, fast, and ideally not lethal. Your stomach growls with a sound that blends right into the street noise, as if it knows not to draw attention to itself. Most Romans don't do elaborate morning meals. There's no towering stack of pancakes waiting for you, no steaming mug of artisanal coffee. Instead, you drift toward a fresh bread, following it like a very tired pigeon. A bakery sits on the corner, its wide stone opening glowing orange from the ovens inside. Bakers have been awake for hours already, working by lamplight so the city can eat by dawn. This is a mainstream historical facting bread is the backbone of the Roman diet, especially for the urban poor, and public bakeries operate almost non-stop. You watch a worker slide round loaves out with a long wooden paddle, the crusts crackling softly as they cool. It's oddly soothing, like culinary ASMR from antiquity. You exchange a small coin for a chunk of bread that's still warm enough to fog your fingers. There's comfort in that warmth, even as you notice the bread is denser than you're used to, made with coarse flour that includes bits of bran and, sometimes, sand. That's not poetic exaggeration. Stone mills shed grit, and Romans quite literally grind their teeth down over time. Dental wear on Roman skeletons is so common that archaeologists can often date remains by how chewed down the molars are. Breakfast. Crunchy in ways no one asked for. You take a bite and chew carefully, reminding yourself that medical care today is, let's say, experimental. The bread fills your mouth, bland but sustaining. To make it more interesting, you consider dipping it in something. Olive oil, maybe, or wine diluted with water. Almost everyone drinks wine, even children, but it's usually watered down. Pure wine is considered a fast track to embarrassment or madness, and Romans love order almost as much as they love judging you. Water, however, is tricky. You pause at a public fountain, listening to the constant splash as people fill jugs and cups. Rome's aqueduct system is legendary, and rightly so. Fresh water flows into the city from miles away, feeding fountains and baths. But here's where things get complicated. The pipes carrying that water are often lined with lead. Historians still argue whether lead poisoning significantly affected the Roman population or if mineral buildup prevented widespread exposure. Either way, you stare into your cup and think, well, that's comforting in an abstract, long-term risk sort of way. You take a sip anyway. Thirst wins arguments quickly. Nearby, a street vendor offers pulls, a simple porridge made from grains and water, maybe dressed up with a little salt or honey if you're lucky. It's filling, cheap, and aggressively unglamorous. You watch another customer sprinkle something on top. Ground herbs, perhaps, or maybe crushed seeds. Roman cooking is a constant improvisation, guided as much by availability as by taste. Recipes exist, but daily eating is practical. You eat what's there and hope your stomach agrees. Then there's the wine. You hesitate, remembering stories. Wine is often adulterated, sweetened with honey, spiced, or, in some less charming cases, mixed with chalk or even lead compounds to enhance flavor. A quirky fringe tidbit you'd probably prefer not to know is that one popular sweetener, sapa, involves boiling grape juice in lead vessels, potentially concentrating toxins. Delicious, possibly. Wise, debatable. You pass on the sweet wine and stick to a plain, watered-down version, congratulating yourself on this extremely modern health decision. As you eat, you watch the street perform its morning routine. Delivery boys dart between stalls, shopkeepers shout prices that somehow always feel negotiable, and liehoods. A man argues loudly that his cheese is fresh despite the cheese itself suggesting otherwise through smell alone. There's a light joke forming in your mind that Roman food safety standards are more suggestion than rule. But you keep chewing. Complaining with a full mouth is universal, apparently, across millennia. You finish your bread and feel that particular satisfaction that comes not from joy but from adequacy. You won't starve before noon. That's a win. Still, a subtle unease lingers. Food in Rome can be cheap and plentiful, but quality varies wildly by wealth and location. The rich feast on meats, fruits, and exotic spices, while the poor rely on grains and whatever extras luck provides. Historians still argue whether the average Roman urban diet was nutritionally sufficient or just barely kept people functional enough to keep the city running. You think back to your bakery purchase and wonder how many hands touched that loaf before yours. Bakers, millers, porters. Rome runs on human chains of labor, many of them enslaved. It's hard not to notice how invisible that work is once the bread reaches your hand. You swallow the last bite slowly, letting the thought drift away rather than lodge too firmly. This is bedtime history, after all, not a moral crisis before sunrise. With breakfast done, you rinse your cup at the fountain and return it to its hook, feeling a small sense of civic participation. Public resources only work if people pretend to care. And right now, you're pretending beautifully. You wipe your hands on your tunic, adding a new stain that will blind right in with the others. Fashion in Rome is forgiving that way. As you step back into the flow of the street, fed but not fully reassured, you understand something important. Eating here isn't about pleasure as much as timing and tolerance. You eat early because later food might be gone. You eat simply because complex dishes cost money and risk. And you eat with one eye on the future, hoping your stomach remains calm. So far, so good. The sun is higher now, the shadows shorter, and the city louder. Your belly is no longer complaining, which frees your mind to worry about entirely new dangers. And as you walk on, you file away a useful Roman lesson in this city. Even breakfast counts as an act of courage. With breakfast settled into your stomach like a dependable brick, your thoughts drift toward cleanliness, hydration, and the strange Roman relationship with both. You're aware of a light film of street dust already clinging to your skin, and it's not even mid-morning yet. In Rome, staying clean is less about sparkling freshness and more about managing layers of grime like a seasoned professional. You follow the sound of running water again, this time with a bit more confidence. Public fountains dot the city, fed by those famous aqueducts that stride across valleys and hills like stone centipedes. This is one of Rome's proudest achievements, and for good reason. Aqueducts bring millions of gallons of water into the city every day, allowing fountains to run continuously. It's a mainstream historical fact that Rome's water supply exceeded that of most ancient cities, giving it a reputation for abundance even if the distribution was uneven. You cup your hands under the cool stream and splash your face. The shock is refreshing, and for a brief moment, you almost forget where you are. Almost. Someone elbows in beside you without apology, filling a jug while humming tunelessly. Personal space, you learn quickly, is another modern invention you'll miss here. You step aside, wiping your face, and consider filling your own small container. Carrying water is smart, but it's also heavy, and you're already calculating every decision like a Roman survival simulator set to hard mode. As you walk, you pass a bathhouse entrance, steam drifting lazily from within. The baths won't be fully busy until later, but even now they hum with quiet activity. Bathing in Rome isn't a luxury reserved for the elite. It's a social institution. For a small fee, almost anyone can enjoy the baths, swaking, and gossiping their way to something resembling cleanliness. Historians still argue whether the baths were primarily about hygiene or social control, a place where norms were reinforced as thoroughly as dirt was scrubbed away. You make a mental note to return later. Right now, the city pulls you forward. You sip from the water you've collected, tasting minerals and something faintly metallic. You remember the lead pipes again. Rome uses lead extensively in plumbing because it's durable and easy to shape. Some scholars insist mineral deposits quickly coated the pipes, reducing exposure. Others aren't so sure. The debate hums quietly in the background of your mind as you swallow. You shrug internally. If this is going to get you, it won't be today. You hope. Water isn't just for drinking. It spills into basins, feeds latrines, and drains into channels that carry waste away. Eventually, public latrines are another Roman specialty, and you pass one now, identifiable by the low murmur of conversation coming from within. Yes, conversation. Using the toilet here is a communal experience. Rows of stone seats with holes, no dividers, no privacy. There's running water beneath to carry things along, and a shared sponge on a stick for wiping. You decide very quickly that you're not desperate enough yet. This decision feels wise. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some Romans believed that bathing too often could weaken the body, opening the pores to illness. Cleanliness was valued, but moderation mattered. This might explain the elaborate bathing routine that involves oiling the skin, sweating, scraping off the oil with a strigil, and only sometimes rinsing with water. Soap exists, but it's not common, and when it appears, it's often more medicinal than everyday. You absent-mindedly rub your forearm, imagining someone scraping it with curved metal later. Sleepily horrifying, but effective. You wander past another fountain where children play, splashing each other with shrieks of laughter until an older woman shoos them away with practiced irritation. Water is precious but plentiful enough here to waste a little on joy. That, too, is part of Rome's magic. For all its filth and danger, it manages moments of lightness. You find yourself smiling, a soft, involuntary thing, before remembering you're supposed to be alert. Smiling makes you look distracted. Distracted people get bumped, or worse. As you move deeper into the city, you notice how water shapes the rhythm of life. Shops cluster near fountains. Baths anchor neighborhoods. Even shrines appear near flowing water, offerings left in hopes of divine favor. Romans see water as both practical and sacred, a gift from gods and engineers alike. You hear someone mutter a quick thanks to a nymph as they fill their jug, hedging spiritual bets the Roman way. Your sandals splash lightly as you cross a damp patch where a fountain has overflowed. It cools your feet, but you can't help wondering what else is mixed in. A light joke bubbles up in your head about ancient Rome being a choose your own adventure of microbes. You suppress a laugh. At least it's keeping you awake. You stop again, leaning against a wall, and take another drink. Your thirst eases, hydration achieved, cleanliness pending. You feel more grounded now, a little more like you belong in this flow of bodies and water. The city no longer feels entirely hostile, just demanding. It offers you what you need, but only if you know where to look and how to navigate the unspoken rules. One thing is, clean water is everywhere in Rome, but safety is always conditional. You can drink it, bathe in it, trust it, but only to a point. Just like everything else here, you push away from the wall and rejoin the street, footsteps steady, senses tuned. The day stretches ahead, full of noise, errands, and hazards you can't yet see. But for now, your face is cool, your throat is wet, and the hum of fountains follows you like a promise that Rome, at least for this moment, is keeping you alive. As the morning settles into itself, you become acutely aware of how visible you are, not in a dramatic, spotlight sort of way, but in the quite Roman sense that everyone is constantly reading everyone else. Clothing here isn't just about staying covered, it's a language, and right now you're speaking it with a pretty basic accent. You tug at your tunic as you walk, smoothing a wrinkle that immediately comes back. The standard Roman tunic is simple, a knee-length rectangle of fabric, belted at the waist. Yours is undyed wool, scratchy and serviceable, the kind worn by people who need their clothes to survive long days rather than impress dinner guests. This is a mainstream historical fact. Most Romans wore plain tunics, with color and decoration increasing alongside wealth and status. White suggests money, because keeping fabric white in this city is practically a full-time job. You glance down at your sandals, leather straps worn soft by use. They slap lightly against the stones as you walk, a sound that blends into the city's rhythm. Closed shoes exist, especially for travel or colder weather, but sandals dominate daily life. The streets are rough, and your feet already feel it. You flex your toes and remind yourself you've walked barefoot on worse surfaces in your life. Probably. Maybe. Sleepy confidence can be very generous. Ahead, you pass a man in a toga, and the difference is immediate. Togas are cumbersome, heavy, and impractical, which is exactly why they matter. They're worn by male Roman citizens on formal occasions, signaling legal status and civic identity. You watch as he adjusts the massive fold of fabric draped over his shoulder, clearly annoyed by it. A light joke drifts through your mind. The toga is basically an ancient way of saying, I'm important enough to be uncomfortable on purpose. You instinctively give him space. This isn't fear, exactly, just habit. Clothing shapes behavior. A senator's broad purple stripe marks power. A narrow stripe suggests a lesser official. Slaves might wear whatever their owner provides, often plain and easily identifiable. There's a persistent myth that slaves had specific clothing, but historians still argue whether there was a consistent slave outfit, or if status was recognized more by behavior and context than by dress alone. You adjust your belt again, wondering what message you're sending. Probably free, but not fancy. Someone who works with their hands. Someone not worth robbing, hopefully. That last part matters. Romans are quick observers and pickpockets are professionals. You keep your movements calm, your posture neutral. Looking confident helps, even if it's mostly wishful thinking. As you pass a small shop, you catch your reflection in a polished bronze surface. Your hair is unstyled, doing whatever it wants, which in Rome usually means short and practical for men. Elaborate hairstyles exist, especially for women, often involve braids and the help of enslaved attendants. A quirky tidbit you remember is that some Roman women used wade from hair imported from Germany or India, prized for texture and color. Globalization, but make it ancient. You run a hand through your hair and leave it at that. Grooming standards exist, but perfection isn't expected at this hour. Still, you can't help noticing that Romans value neatness. A clean, shaven face is fashionable for much of the imperial period, though beards cycle in and out of favor. Barbershops double as social hubs, places for news and opinions as sharp as the razors. You file that away as another potential stop later, if you feel brave. Fabric brushes your arm as someone passes close, and you catch a hint of perfume. Heavy, sweet, almost medicinal. Romans love scents, using oils infused with flowers, herbs, and resins. Some mixtures are subtle, others announce their presence loudly. Smell, like clothing, is a status signal. You sniff your own sleeve. You smell like street smoke and bread. Authentic, if not aspirational. You watch a woman ahead of you adjust her stola, the long garment worn by respectable married women. Its drape is careful, deliberate. Jewelry glints at her ears. Clothing here also communicates morality and family status, especially for women. Deviations invite comment. Historians still argue how strictly these norms were enforced in daily life versus idealized in texts. But the pressure is real enough that you feel it humming in the background. A small breeze lifts the edge of your tunic, cooling your legs. It's comfortable, flexible, easy to move in. You start to appreciate its simplicity. You can walk, work, sit, and run if needed, and running is always a possibility. Fires break out, fights happen. Can't fear. Flexibility counts. As you continue on, you realize something soothing. Despite all the symbolism and hierarchy, most people here are dressed a lot like you. The city is full of ordinary bodies in ordinary fabric, getting through the day. The extremes stand out. The togas, the jewels, but they're a minority. This realization lowers your shoulders a fraction. You blend. Blending is good. You give your tunic one last tug, and square your shoulders and step forward with a bit more assurance. You may not look powerful, but you look plausible. And in Rome, plausibility is often the difference between ignored and being noticed. For now, ignored feels like exactly the right outfit to wear. With your clothes settled and your confidence upgraded from fragile to cautiously functional, your mind turns to the practical question Rome asks everyone, every single day: what do you do, and how do you avoid dying while doing it? Work here isn't a career ladder so much as a patchwork of opportunities, favors, and calculated risks. You don't dream big in the morning. You aim to survive until evening. You slow your pace and watch others moving with purpose. Porters carry heavy loads slung from poles, backs bent but step steady. Shop assistants sweep thresholds, already arguing with early customers. Scribbling clerks hurry along with wax tablets tucked under their arms. Rome runs on labor, and most of it is visible, noisy, and relentless. A mainstream historical fact is that there is no concept of a weekend as you know it. Work follows the rhythm of daylight, religious festivals aside, and even those often involve work of a different kind. You consider your options. Skilled trades are safer and better paid, but they require training, tools, and reputation. 3 things you don't have. Day labor is easier to access. You could carry goods, run messages, help at a workshop. The pay isn't great, but the danger is manageable if you choose carefully. Heavy lifting strains your body. Construction sites collapse. Smithies burn. Every option comes with its own fun little probability of disaster. A man near a shop doorway calls out, looking for an extra pair of hands to unload amphora of alive oil. You pause, calculating. Amphora are heavy, awkward, and slippery when cracked. Drop one, and you've wasted expensive goods. That could mean docked pay, or worse, you give a polite nod and keep walking. The decision feels oddly empowering, like declining a meeting you didn't schedule. Patronage crosses your mind. In Rome, having a patron, a wealthier citizen who offers protection and occasional money in exchange for loyalty and services, is one of the safest paths. Clients attend their patron's morning greeting, the salutatio, and receive small gifts or coins. It's stable, but also binding. You'd owe favors, votes, time. Historians still argue whether patronage was a mutual support system or a refined form of social control. From where you're standing, it looks like both. You pass a group of men gathered outside a domus waiting quietly. Their tunics are clean but worn. Clients almost certainly. They look bored, resigned, and hopeful all at once. You imagine standing there every morning, rain or shine, waiting to be acknowledged. The safety is tempting. The dependence less so. You keep moving. A more flexible option appears in the form of errands. Messengers are always needed. Rome's information moves by foot and word, and speed matters. You could carry notes, summon people, deliver goods. It's light work physically, but it requires navigating crowded streets quickly. One wrong turn, one angry cart driver, and you're learning firsthand how Romans feel about personal responsibility. Spoiler, it's usually your fault. You watch a runner sprint past, sandals slapping, breath controlled. Impressive. Probably experienced. Probably still underpaid. A light joke surfaces in your mind about ancient Rome inventing the hustle culture 2,000 years early. You snort softly and glance around to make sure no one noticed. Laughing to yourself can look suspicious. Work is also tied deeply to status. Many trades are associated with enslaved labor, even when free people do the same tasks. Bakers, cleaners, miners. Essential jobs, low prestige. Yet these jobs keep the city alive. You feel the quiet tension between necessity and respect, woven into every interaction. Rome is efficient at normalizing inequality. You absorb this observation and let it drift, heavy but distant like background music. Eventually, you settle on a small workshop repairing sandals. The owner eyes you briefly, assessing muscle, posture, and probably whether you look like a flight risk. You offer help for the day, no long-term commitment. He agrees with a Groot. You sit on a low stool, handed leather strips and an awl, and begin threading under instruction. The work is repetitive, calming in its own way. Fix strap, knot, trim, repeat. Your fingers ache, but the rhythm soothes you. As you work, you learn small things. Leather quality varies wildly. Customers complain regardless. The shop smells of hide oil and dust. It's not glamorous, but it's indoors and relatively safe. A quirky tidbit surfaces cobblers in Rome were sometimes associated with biting satire in literature, perhaps because they heard everyone's complaints up close. You smile at that, imagining the tradition of venting at customer service stretching across millennia. Coins clink softly when you're paid. Modest, but fair enough for a day's effort. You tuck them carefully into your belt. This is how you get by here. One day at a time, one sensible decision after another, hoping none of them turn out to be fatal in hindsight. You stand, stretch, and step back into the street, hands sore but spirits oddly lifted. Work done, at least for now. You've earned your place in the city's endless motion, and Rome, in its indifferent way, allows you to continue, coins secured and fingers still tingling from honest work. You step back into the street and immediately remember that Rome's roads are not designed for comfort, safety, or patience. They are designed for movement. Constant, loud, unpredictable movement. You pause at the edge of an intersection, watching the chaos unfold like a recurring nightmare you're supposed to navigate calmly. Carts dominate the wider streets, pulled by mules or oxen that look permanently unimpressed with human planning. Wheels grind against stone, sending vibrations through your sandals and up into your knees. Drivers shout warnings that sound more like insults, and sometimes they are. This is a mainstream historical fact. Daytime cart traffic is officially restricted in much of Rome to reduce congestion, forcing many deliveries to happen at night. But rules here are flexible, especially when money or influence is involved. The result is a city that feels like it's always ignoring its own best ideas. You try crossing when a gap appears, misjudge the speed of an approaching cart, and have to jump back. Your heart does a quick and lie-hoods, energetic dance it did not ask permission for. The driver doesn't slow, doesn't apologize, and definitely doesn't make eye contact. You exhale slowly and remind yourself that adrenaline burns calories. Probably. That's helpful, right? You wait again, then move with the flow, slipping between pedestrians who seem to sense openings instinctively. Children dart through traffic with terrifying confidence. Elderly men plant themselves stubbornly in the road, daring the world to adjust. You learn by imitation, watching feet, not faces. The stones beneath you are grooved from centuries of wheels, guiding carts like rails, useful if you're a vehicle, less reassuring if you're not. As you walk, you notice raised stepping stones crossing the street at intervals. They allow pedestrians to cross without stepping directly into whatever liquid situation is currently occupying the gutter. These stones also conveniently space carts wheels, a clever design feature that keeps traffic aligned. Historians still argue whether the stones were more about pedestrian comfort or infrastructure control, but from your perspective, they're small islands of mercy. You hop from stone to stone, balancing briefly like a sleepy acrobat. It feels almost playful until a cart barrels past close enough for you to feel the wind of it. You mutter something unkind under your breath and keep moving. Rome rewards momentum. Hesitation gets you bumped. The noise is constant. Hooves, wheels, vendors, arguments, laughter, curses. Sound reflects off stone walls and funnels through narrow streets, making everything louder than it should be. You imagine trying to nap through this and understand why Romans rise early. Silence is rare and usually suspicious. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your minding. Some Romans supposedly used earplugs made from wool to sleep, especially those living near busy streets. Whether effective or not is another matter. You picture yourself stuffing wool in your ears tonight, staring at the ceiling, and accept that your standards are already adjusting. You press on, dodging a spilled crate of vegetables and a dog that appears mid-street with no survival instincts whatsoever. Animals roam freely here: dogs, chickens, pigs, adding another variable to the traffic equation. The dog survives, barely. You take this as a sign to stay alert. By the time you reach a quieter side street and livelihoods, your shoulders ache with tension you didn't notice building. You slow your pace, breathing more evenly now. Street navigation in Rome is less about knowing where you're going and more about staying alive while getting there. You're learning. Gradually, you glance back once, just to appreciate that you crossed one of the city's busiest arteries without being crushed, cursed at directly, or fined. That feels like an achievement worth savoring. The city hums behind you, relentless and alive. You move forward again, footsteps calmer now, the rhythm of Rome settling back into your bones. Traffic fades slightly, replaced by voices and footsteps, and you let yourself relax. Just a little, before the next challenge presents itself. The street opens up ahead of you, and the noise shifts from grinding wheels to layered voices echoing off marble and stone. You've reached the Forum. You don't need a sign to tell you. The atmosphere changes immediately. The air feels charged, like a place where words carry weight and reputations can be dented before lunch. You slow without meaning to. Almost everyone does. The Roman Forum is not just a space, it's a stage. This is where politics, law, religion, and gossip all bump into each other and pretend it's organized. A mainstream historical fact is that the Forum functions as the civic heart of Rome, hosting everything from trials and elections to commercial deals and public ceremonies. If Rome has a pulse, this is where you'd feel it strongest. You drift toward the edge, not wanting to stand out by standing still. A man is speaking loudly from a raised platform, arms slicing the air as if the argument itself might try to escape. A small crowd has gathered, some listening intently, others clearly just enjoying the show. Public speaking is entertainment here. You catch fragments, complaints about corruption, praise for tradition, vague promises that sound impressive without meaning much. You think, fleetingly, that some things never change. Nearby, lawyers cluster around clients, murmuring strategy and reassurance. Cases are heard in public, and proceedings are loud, theatrical, and often personal. Winning depends as much on performance as evidence. Historians still argue whether Roman justice was fundamentally fair or simply skewed toward wealth and eloquence. Watching now, you suspect the truth leans heavily toward whoever can afford better shoes and a louder voice. You wander past a group laughing far too hard at something whispered. Scandal moves fast here. Accusations, affairs, and rumors circulate like currency, traded freely and often without concern for accuracy. Someone points subtly at a passing official, rolling their eyes. You don't know why, but you nod anyway. Blending in sometimes means agreeing with things you don't fully understand. Statues line the space, stern faces watching as if judging the living against impossible standards. Hear us, generals, gods. You walk among centuries of expectation. You feel small, but oddly anchored, like you're standing in the middle of a very old conversation. You pause near a temple and rest your weight on one foot, listening. The forum is loud, but it's not chaotic. There's a rhythm to it. Speakers pause for effect. Crowds respond. Deals are struck with handshakes and glances. You realize that simply being present counts as participation. Seeing and being seen matters. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Public shaming is an accepted part of Roman culture. Crafty jokes, even official condemnations, can ruin reputations. Memory itself can be weaponized. The idea makes you shift slightly, suddenly aware of how exposed everything feels. After a while, the noise starts to blur, becoming less sharp, more like background static. You take that as your cue to move on. Lingering too long in places of power can be risky if you don't belong there. You slip away toward a side path, the forum's voices fading behind you. As you leave, you carry with you the sense that Rome runs not just on roads and water, but on words, spoken, shouted, whispered. And today, at least, you've passed through without becoming the topic of conversation. That, you decide, is another quiet success. Coins jingling in your belt from the morning's work, you pause to consider the next survival priority: money, trade, and the eternal uncertainty of Roman commerce. Even if you avoid carts and orators, you can't walk through Rome unprepared for the constant calculations demanded by daily life. Prices are negotiable, quality varies wildly, and everyone seems to have an opinion about both. You duck into a small market alley where merchants are arranging their goods. Clay pots, dried fish, fresh vegetables, and stacks of bread still warm from ovens. You notice immediately that scales are everywhere, balancing coins and items with a mix of precision and performance. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman commerce relies heavily on standardized weights, though enforcement is inconsistent. Fraud is common. A merchant might shave aloof here, underreport weight there, and smile all the while. Trust is optional. Vigilance is required. You reach for a small sack of olives, finger brushing against the slightly oily surface. The vendor, an older man with a sun-leathered face, eyes you warily. You've got coins ready, but the negotiation begins before you even speak. Light, casual chatter about quality. He insists they're the finest from Campania. Blends with subtle threats that if you argue, the olives might mysteriously disappear. You chuckle softly to yourself. Modern haggling feels like a polite suggestion compared to this. Your coin weighs heavier than it should. The vendor counts it, squinting. You hold your breath, aware of how crucial it is to maintain composure. Losing face here is more expensive than losing a coin. Historians still argue whether small-scale cheating like this was tolerated as part of market culture or punished more frequently than records suggest. From where you're standing, it feels like the former, with occasional dramatic enforcement for effect. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Goss. Roman coins often have propaganda images, emperors, gods, victories. So every transaction is also a subtle reminder of who's in charge. You hand over a coin stamped with an emperor's face, wondering if he cares about your olive negotiation at all. Probably not. But still, the symbolism is oddly comforting. You move down the alley, weaving between shoppers and stray animals. Food, drink, and sundries line tables, baskets, and crates. You spot a vendor selling fish that still seems to wiggle faintly. You recoil just enough to be polite. Some Romans are fearless when it comes to seafood, others prefer to cook it thoroughly. You are somewhere in the middle, leaning slightly toward or maybe later. A quick glance at prices makes you realize just how variable everything is. Apples from one stand cost 3 asses, from another 5. Bread can range from a single coin to several depending on shape, size, and where the baker thinks he can get away with it. You shake your head. Modern shoppers complain about price fluctuations at farmers' markets. Try a city where there's no regulation and everyone's hustling for survival. You swallow another small chuckle and keep moving, our lives tucked safely in your bag. Nearby, a vendor is blatantly adjusting his scale with hidden weights. You notice it, and also notice that nobody seems to mind, including the buyer, who shrugs and pays. This is how Rome balances efficiency, deception, and community acceptance all at once. You file this under things you accept if you want to stay fed and sane. You pause for a drink from a nearby fountain and wipe your fingers. Counting coins, weighing goods, reading faces. It's exhausting, but this is the rhythm of life. Money here is a survival tool, a symbol of status, and occasionally a weapon. Every purchase is a decision that could ripple through your day. Drop a coin, misread a scale, or insult a vendor, and consequences, embarrassing or practical, arrive faster than the morning cart traffic. Finally, you tuck your purchases under your arm and continue, stepping lightly to avoid a puddle. Your stomach is fed, your hands busy, your mind alert. Rome demands attention to small details, and today, for now, you've managed them all. This is enough to feel competent. For a brief, rare moment, you allow yourself to think that surviving Rome may not just be about luck. It's also about awareness, timing, and a little humor at absurdity. With your pockets jingling and your small bag of provisions secured, it's time to face perhaps one of the most pungent, polarizing aspects of Roman daily life, food beyond bread and our lives. Lunch, or what Romans casually call cena if it's early, is rarely a leisurely affair. Instead, it's a parade of smells, textures, and social cues that can either delight or haunt your nostrils forever. You drift toward a small stall that boasts something called garum, a fermented fish sauce that smells like it's actively arguing with your senses. This is a mainstream historical fact. In garum was a staple condiment for Romans, prized for its salty, umami-rich flavor. It's poured on almost everything from vegetables to meat, and sometimes even bread if the cook is feeling ambitious. You wrinkle your nose, considering if your stomach is brave enough for experimentation. A quirky tidbit pops into your minding. Some gourmets would age garum in the sun for months, even years, claiming this created a more refined flavor. You briefly imagine leaving a jar in your apartment window for a century and regret having curiosity at all. Smell aside, this liquid was worth a fortune, and its production even supported small industries along the coast. You take a cautious sniff. The smell is aggressively Roman. You pause to watch a butcher filleting fish for a customer, blood and scales scattering over the counter. You focus on the technique and remind yourself that you don't have to participate, just observe. A light joke forms in your minding. Rome invented fast food, but not the kind anyone wants to Instagram. The smell, noise, and crowds combine into a sensory lesson in humility. Nearby, a group of men debate politics while dipping bread into garum. You notice how taste, status, and conversation are entangled. Historians still argue whether the consumption of pungent foods was a sign of refined taste, extreme poverty, or just practical preservation methods. Observing this crowd, you suspect all three might be correct depending on which side of the forum you're on. You take a smaller bite of bread and cautiously dip it into the fish sauce. Your face twitches reflexively, a private reaction to a flavor that modern palates might describe as aggressively brave. You chew slowly, savoring or surviving the experience. The bread's texture helps, but the taste is undeniably intense. The people around you eat as if nothing is unusual, chatting and gesturing with casual abandon. You admire their bravery or perhaps their denial. Nearby, a vendor sells cooked vegetables sprinkled with herbs, olives, and a few spices. You take a small portion, grateful for something milder, yet still noticing the textures, the oils, the slight grit from stone milled flour. Roman food is rarely pristine in a modern sense. Practicality outweighs presentation. You bite carefully, trying to discern flavor from texture, heat from smell. You survive. For now, a subtle amusement rises as you note the variety of preferences around you. Someone is eating raw eggs. Someone else devours a hunk of cheese still coated with rind and perhaps a few stray insects. You adjust your mental boundaries, reminding yourself that adaptation is essential in this city. A light joke drifts in: you could die today from a cart, a scolding, or a daring olive. You'd better get used to it all. Sitting briefly on a low step, you eat your lunch while scanning the scene. Bread, fish sauce, olives, vegetables. It's not elegant, but it's filling. The variety is a strength. Even if some items test your courage, you feel full enough to keep moving, aware that Rome rewards preparation, tolerance, and attention to social cues. Finally, you wipe your hands and face, rinse briefly at a fountain, and let the smells settle. The city doesn't care about cleanliness, only survival and efficiency, but you're alive, fed, and still moving. You make a mental note to remember this as a small victory. Food isn't just nourishment, it's a rehearsal in bravery, adaptation, and maybe humility. You rise, adjusting your tunic, ready to step back into the flow, senses alert for the next lesson the city has to teach. Lunch eaten, but the day is far from over. Rome never lets you rest entirely. You wander further, stomach full but senses sharpened, noticing that the city is alive with more than just commerce and food. It's thick with belief, superstition, and the unspoken rules of divine oversight. Shrines appear on street corners, small statues tucked between buildings, or altars that jut from walls where you least expect them. You step carefully, aware that nearly every Roman you pass has at some point acknowledged a god, goddess, or spirit, even if only to avoid a curse. Religion is everywhere, even when you barely notice it. A mainstream historical fact is that Romans practiced polytheism intensely, often incorporating local or foreign deities as the city expanded. Gods were credited, or blamed, for virtually everything: illness, success, rain, the perfect loaf of bread. You notice a small statue of Mercury near a merchant's stall, coins scattered at its base. Patrons may toss a coin, whisper a wish, or simply nod in passing, hedging their bets with ritual and superstition. You pause to watch a ritual in progress. A vendor offers a small sacrifice of wine to Fortuna before opening his stall. He mutters a prayer, gestures toward the sky, and steps back, clearly expecting luck to attend him. You imagine trying this today. Please help my olives sell without being stolen. You suppress a laugh, aware that Romans probably wouldn't find the joke funny. They take divine bureaucracy seriously. Historians still argue whether these rituals had any measurable effect on outcomes or functioned primarily as social reinforcement. Watching now, it's clear that both interpretations might hold some truth. A quirky tidbit drifts in: some Romans carried little charms or amulets known as bulla for protection, not just for children but occasionally adults. These might feature symbols of gods, animals, or abstract designs, worn like a portable insurance policy against misfortune. You rub your fingers together as if you had one, and notice how instinctive it feels to hope that luck can be influenced in some tiny, tactile way. You continue, noticing that street diviners and soothsayers have positioned themselves strategically. Their offerings are subtle: a glance at entrails, a hurried reading of the sky, a quiet interpretation of everyday events. People stop, sometimes for advice, sometimes for entertainment. You linger just long enough to watch a man nod solemnly at a prediction that the day will be uneventful yet profitable, and you realize that Roman optimism, filtered through divine authority, is both comforting and slightly terrifying. Passing a small temple to Vesta, You feel the hum of quiet devotion inside. Vestal virgins maintain the sacred flame responsible for the city's spiritual security. Failure is said to have dire consequences. You imagine, fleetingly, trying to manage even a single flame under such pressure. The mental exercise is exhausting, but strangely grounding. As you navigate between statues, altars, and ritual spaces, you notice people leaving small offerings: a coin, a flower, a fragment of food. The act itself matters more than the amount. It's a reminder that belief here is woven into daily routine, just like water, bread, and traffic. You glance at a passerby muttering a quick prayer, as if it were a brief text message to the gods. The casual reverence feels oddly soothing. You pause at another shrine, tucked into a wall almost too small to notice. It's dedicated to a minor deity, one you've never heard of. A few coins sit in the tiny basin. You reach out, touch one lightly, and offer a quiet thought in return. You don't know if it works, and that's perfectly fine. The gesture itself matters. Religion is not just ritual. It's part of the social glue, a way to negotiate daily hazards, and occasionally a source of hope or reassurance. As you walk on, you notice a subtle rhythm in the sitting. People align their actions around divine presence, prayers, or simple gestures of faith, and somehow it keeps the wheels turning. You carry a sense of alert respect, a gentle awareness that Rome is never just streets and stone. It's also invisible forces, hedge bets, and the careful dance of belief. You take a deep breath, feeling the morning sun warm your shoulders, the hum of activity surround you, and the quiet presence of countless gods hovering just out of sight. In Rome, even disbelief requires navigation, and for today, you're doing it successfully, step by careful step. You leave the shrines behind, but the sense of unseen eyes and whispered expectations lingers. Your next stop is the public baths, a place that promises warmth, cleanliness, and the subtle threat of social embarrassment. Walking through the side streets, you notice the crowd thickening. Romans move with purpose here. Each step is part of a dance that you're still learning. The baths are a marvel of Roman engineering, a mainstream historical fact you can feel before you even enter. Hot and cold water are piped through a series of aqueducts, pipes, and furnaces, creating a bathing experience that rivals anything in the ancient world. Steam rises in soft clouds, curling around stone columns and marble floors, carrying smells of sweat, oil, and herbs. You pause at the entrance, aware that stepping inside will involve both physical and social navigation. Inside, the space is warm and crowded. Men and women bath separately, but noise carries easily. A quirky tidbit: many Romans carry their own oil, applying it before scrubbing with a strigil, a curved metal scraper, to remove dirt and dead skin. The process is intimate, meticulous, and, for someone new like you, slightly terrifying. You watch carefully, making mental notes, aware that dropping your oil or misusing a tool could mark you as a clumsy outsider. You dip a toe into the warm water and shiver pleasantly. The heat is enveloping, relaxing muscles still tense from navigating streets, vendors, and carts. Historians still argue whether daily bathing was primarily about hygiene, leisure, or social theater. From your perspective, it seems to be a mix. You clean yourself, but also observe, interact, and measure where you belong among these other bodies. You find a bench near the edge and sit, watching as bathers move through pools and steam. Conversation drifts past. Gossip, politics, jokes about who overslept, who overspent, and who overstayed their welcome. Even in these communal spaces, status is clear. The wealthy occupy larger pools or private rooms, the less fortunate settle for common baths, sharing space, time, and sometimes awkward proximity. You remind yourself that blending in is safer than standing out. A light joke occurs to young Romans invented social networking, but in soap and water instead of apps. You smile discreetly, hoping no one overheard. The heat is comforting, but it also sharpens senses. Every glance counts. Every gesture interprets you, and every movement can be part of the unspoken social map. You pick up your oil and begin the slow, careful ritual of applying, scraping and rinsing. It feels strange at first, oddly intimate yet strangely cleansing. The strigil scrapes away layers of dust, sweat, and street life, revealing more than just skin. You notice the smell of herbs in the water, the warmth on your shoulders, the rhythm of water lapping against stone, and allow a rare feeling of calm to settle in. Nearby, a conversation about politics erupts, a senator's latest decision, a public scandal, and the usual gossip about food, water and property disputes. The voices carry across the pools. Historians still argue whether bathhouses were incubators for political maneuvering or just coincidental meeting places. You suspect both. Observation is as important as bathing. Attention is survival. You move slowly through the pools, letting warm water massage your tired muscles. The steam thickens, softening edges and blurring the details of who's watching or judging. You notice the patterns in clothing, or lack thereof, and the subtle hierarchy in body language. Even stripped down, social cues persist. You remind yourself that Rome, in all its nakedness, is never neutral. After a while, you rinse, feeling lighter, warmer, and somehow more aligned with the flow of the city. Leaving the baths, you adjust your tunic and sandals, refreshed but aware that the streets outside are waiting. You've learned small lessons here: patience, observation, and the quiet art of fitting in. Bathing isn't just cleansing, it's training for the rhythm of Rome, where survival depends as much on awareness as on muscle or coin. You step back into the street, water dripping lightly from your hair and arms, carrying a new confidence. Today, you're not just fed, hydrated, or clothed, you're acclimated. And that, in this city, feels almost luxurious. Refreshed from the baths but acutely aware of the city's relentless energy, you find yourself edging toward the subject everyone in Rome must understand: law and punishment. You thought the forum was loud. Here, legal authority looms in every corner, and ignorance is less excusable than hunger. You've learned the hard way that survival involves more than food, water, and careful walking. It involves knowing where you stand in the hierarchy and how far you can push your luck. Roman law is famously complex, a mainstream historical fact that both awes and terrifies newcomers. Citizens enjoy certain protections, while non-citizens, freedmen, and slaves face very different consequences. You observe a minor scuffle on the street, a man accused of bumping into a patrician's cart. Words fly, hands gesture, a magistrate's clerk scribbles furiously, and the outcome is swift, a fine and a public admonition. Justice moves fast when status is involved. You note that in Rome, knowing your place isn't just polite, it's pragmatic. A quirky tidbit drifts into your minding. In some cases, Romans used public shaming as punishment, posting names or infraction details for all to see. The concept is eerily similar to modern naming and shaming, online except with more stone and less fee. You imagine your own blunder being etched in graffiti or announced from a balcony and shudder. Best not to give anyone the opportunity. Historians still argue whether the Roman legal system was fundamentally equitable or skewed toward the wealthy and connected. Watching from the sidelines, you suspect that both interpretations hold partial truth. Laws exist on paper, but in practice, influence, appearance, and timing shape outcomes as much as statutes. Even a minor misunderstanding can cascade into fines, social scorn, or a forced apology. You decide it's better to be cautious and polite. Slaves appear frequently in legal matters, acting as witnesses, informants, or even defendants. You notice how their presence changes the tone of interactions. Some people treat them as invisible, others speak sharply, and the law sometimes ignores them entirely. Observing, you feel the subtle tension between status, power, and survival. Again, a lesson in navigating everyday life. You continue walking past magistrates' offices and notice graffiti marking recent verdicts, names, and sometimes political commentary. Reading them, you detect humor, anger, and warning. You realize quickly that the written word here is a tool as sharp as a sword, capable of influencing public perception in seconds. This is survival information, knowing who's favored, who's resented, and what's socially acceptable can keep you out of trouble. A man approaches, seeking witnesses for a dispute over a stolen goat. You step aside, heart quickening. Someone could easily misread your position. You decide not to speak, only nod, and hope invisibility works in your favor. Sometimes discretion is the best legal strategy. You pause near the corner of a wide street, observing a small punishment ceremony. A minor offender receives a public flogging, more for example than necessity. You notice the crowd's reactions, a mixture of awe, fear, and mild amusement. The lesson is clear: rules matter, but enforcement is performative. Humiliation is part of the system, and compliance is as much social as legal. You straighten your tunic and keep moving. Understanding law, punishment, and class privilege isn't just an academic exercise, it's a daily requirement. Rome's legal landscape is intricate, visible, and subtly omnipresent. Every glance, gesture, and step is measured against it. You feel the weight of observation and regulation settle lightly on your shoulders, a quiet reminder that, in this city, rules are everywhere, even when they're invisible. By the time you turn onto a quieter street, the city's lessons have accumulated. Food, water, clothing, work, traffic, baths, religion, and law, they all intersect. You feel slightly more competent, even slightly safer. But you also know that Rome's pressures are relentless. Mistakes are public, consequences swift, and learning never-ending. The city hums around you, indifferent to effort or anxiety alike. For now, you've survived another segment, observed carefully, and avoided major infractions. It's a small victory, but one that earns a rare moment of quiet satisfaction in the bustle of ancient Rome. You inhale deeply, savoring the rhythm of the streets and the hum of authority in every corner. Leaving the echoes of law and punishment behind, you find yourself drawn toward another Roman institution just as revealing of social dynamics, the public baths. But this time, more than hygiene, you're curious about the gossip, camaraderie, and subtle power plays that unfold there. You recall the warm water, steam, and the soft scrape of strigils against skin, and you realize the baths are a classroom disguised as relaxation. The pools are bustling now, full of men chatting in low tones, some leaning casually against stone edges, others standing stiffly, observing their peers. A mainstream historical fact is that baths serve as social hubs, not just places to get clean. People exchange news, discuss politics, form alliances, and sometimes settle minor disputes here. Observation is as crucial as bathing. You dip a toe into the water again, letting it envelop your foot, then step fully in, feeling the tension in your legs loosen immediately. You notice the subtle hierarchies in seating, posture, and conversation. Wealthier bathers have private alcoves or larger sections of the pool, while commoners crowd around edges, balancing comfort with visibility. A quirky tidbit floats in your mind. Some Romans would bring small pets or even exotic birds to the baths, showing off status and amusing themselves simultaneously. And livelihoods. You chuckle quietly at the thought of sparrows perched on marble ledges, squawking over the latest gossip. Historians still argue whether the bath's primary function was cleanliness, leisure, or social control. From where you stand, it seems all three are valid, depending on whom you ask and where you sit. You settle into a corner of the pool, letting the warmth relax both muscles and nerves, while keeping your eyes subtly scanning. Being visible but not prominent seems like a good survival tactic. A group nearby is debating a recent gladiatorial contest, voices low but insistent. You overhear their opinions on strategy, skill, and betting, realizing that even leisure activities are bound by rules, hierarchy, and social negotiation. The baths are a microcosm of the sitting. Every interaction carries subtle weight, and your ability to read it quietly keeps you safe. You apply a small amount of oil, scrape it with your strigil, and rinse. The ritual feels almost meditative now, despite the bustle around you. Steam rises, mingling with the sounds of chatter and splashing water, creating a sensory cocoon. You find a rhythm in it, feeling both part of the city and slightly removed, observant, aware, and calm. Nearby, an older man tells a story about a theft at the Forum, embellishing the details with dramatic hand gestures. His audience laughs, gasps, and whispers advice, demonstrating that baths are as much about storytelling and social cohesion as about cleaning skin. You listen, noting how tales reinforce social norms, warn of danger, and occasionally entertain with the absurd. A light joke occurs to you in Rome. Bathing is essentially networking in water, minus the coffee. You suppress a laugh, careful not to draw attention. The lessons here are subtle but valuable. Observe, listen, respect hierarchy, and blend in while engaging just enough to learn. After a while you rise, water dripping from your arms, muscles relaxed, mind alert. You've absorbed small but critical insights into Roman life. Power, gossip, status, and observation are everywhere, even in steam-filled pools. Stepping back into the street, the city seems a little less daunting, the rhythm a little more familiar. Bathing is done, social cues observed, and survival tactics subtly sharpened. Stepping out of the baths, the sunlight hits your wet skin, and you feel suddenly exposed. Not just physically but socially. The streets are busier now. The midday pulse of Rome is at its peak. Merchants shout prices, children dart between legs, carts rumble over worn stones, and the hum of conversation forms a constant backdrop. You realize that leaving a safe, warm pool is a transition from controlled chaos to full sensory bombardment. Your next lesson comes in the form of transportation. How Romans moved themselves and their goods across this sprawling city. You notice littered carts, some carrying grain sacks taller than a person, others laden with wine amphorae. Horses and oxen strain under heavy loads, their hooves clattering in rhythm with the stones. A mainstream historical fact: Roman streets are designed primarily for carts and wagons. Pedestrian comfort is secondary. You dodge a wheel at the last second, heart racing, and make a mental note to always anticipate movement from every direction. A quirky tidbit drifts. Some Romans would paint small symbols on cart wheels or add bells to mules as a sort of identification, or perhaps an early form of warning system. You imagine stepping into traffic while listening to jingling bells and wonder if that would make navigation easier or more confusing. Either way, you decide observation is your best tool. You step carefully along the side of the street, calculating every foot placement. Historians still argue whether Roman traffic management was surprisingly effective or chaotic by design. From your first-hand experience, it leans heavily toward chaotic, but survival is possible if you pay attention, move deliberately, and accept a few bumps along the way. A group of porters catches your eye, coordinating the movement of heavy crates with little more than shouts and hand gestures. Muscle, timing, and trust dominate their workflow. You imagine how exhausting it must be to navigate the heat, uneven stones, and impatient pedestrians while carrying your livelihood on your back. Survival here requires constant awareness, stamina, and patience. You continue past street performers, musicians, acrobats, and storytellers who command small crowds. Their presence adds color, distraction, and sometimes opportunity. A clever observer could profit from their audiences, selling goods or information. You consider the possibilities but decide not to intervene. Blending remains the priority. Nearby, a woman balances a basket of eggs on her head, weaving skillfully between pedestrians. You marvel at the balance and control required, realizing that everyday Romans have mastered physical coordination in ways you take for granted. A small joke arises, and if you tried that, the street would look like a small, chaotic omelette. You suppress the laugh. Distraction here can be dangerous. You cross a narrow bridge spanning a shallow canal. Water flows sluggishly below, reflecting sunlight and the shadows of people passing overhead. Romans often built streets and canals intertwined, making navigation as much vertical as horizontal. You balance carefully on the worn stones, aware that one slip could mean wet clothes, lost coins, or worse. A street vendor waves at you, offering dried figs and nuts. You nod politely, knowing that bargaining is expected but not obligatory. The city operates on a mix of expectation, negotiation, and occasional performance. Every interaction carries the potential for gain or annoyance. You tuck the idea away for later. For now, observation and survival are enough. Finally, you find a quieter side street, catching your breath. The midday sun warms your skin, drying the last traces of bathwater. You reflect on the lesson just learned. Navigating Rome's streets is a combination of strategy, timing, and attention to detail. Success isn't about speed or bravery alone, it's about blending, predicting, and respecting the chaotic pulse of the city. The rhythm of the streets continues around you, relentless and alive. You feel a faint confidence rising. You've crossed traffic, observed social cues, and survived without mishap. The city's pulse no longer feels alien. Instead, it feels like a challenge you might just be able to meet. As the afternoon sun warms the streets, your senses are attuned to a new kind of spectacle. The entertainment options that dominate Roman leisure. You know the city doesn't pause, but here, for a while, it seems to choreograph itself around amusement. Theatre, games, and occasional spectacles claim attention like streetlights, pulling both citizens and visitors into rhythms of observation, judgment, and delight. You drift toward a small open theatre, catching the buzz of a crowd gathering. A mainstream historical factor, Roman theatre offers comedy, tragedy, and often political satire. The stages are simple, yet the performances are lively, combining music, masks, and physical comedy to keep audiences engaged. You notice children squirming, adults whispering critiques, and merchants selling snacks on the side. The energy is contagious. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some performances included actors using stilts or exaggerated masks to mock public figures or gods. Imagine watching someone the size of a small cart stumble across the stage, delivering insults you hope aren't meant for you. You smile faintly, appreciating the creativity and the subtle risk of a city that takes reputation seriously. Historians still argue whether theatre primarily served moral, educational, or entertainment purposes. Observing the crowd, it seems all three coexist. People laugh, reflect, and occasionally discuss the play's subtle commentary on contemporary politics. You take a mental noting. Laughter can carry as much weight as law in shaping opinions here. You move closer to the edge of the seating, careful not to attract attention. The theatre is crowded, standing out is risky. Observation remains your best tool. You watch the actors gesturing dramatically, the audience reacting in rhythm. The interplay is mesmerizing. Emotion, timing, and social cues combine into a theatre that's part performance, part communal experience. Nearby, a man places a small wager with his neighbor on which character will triumph. Betting is casual, fluid, and entirely unsanctioned, but culturally ingrained. You imagine the thrill, the tension, the minor pride or embarrassment of winning or losing, and think that gambling here is a social glue as much as a pastime. Across the street, another spectacle draws attention, a small arena with gladiators practicing or performing demonstrations. You catch glimpses of leather, shields, and sparring, realizing the distinction between training and deadly combat is subtle but crucial. Light joke forms. If you were a gladiator, today you'd probably be on a "don't mess with me" list by lunchtime. Survival seems more appealing from the sidelines. You linger long enough to watch the crowd react, noting who laughs, who gasps, and who whispers quietly to neighbors. Entertainment here is communal, informative, and competitive all at once. You appreciate the subtle social learning it provides, reading reactions, interpreting status, and understanding cultural values without participating directly. By the time you step away from the theatre, the sun has lowered slightly, shadows stretching across the cobbles. You carry small lessons about observation, humor, judgment, and timing. Lessons as essential for surviving Rome as knowing the streets or handling coins. Entertainment is more than distraction, it's training. and you've taken careful notes. The city continues to pulse around you, merchants shouting, carts rolling, voices blending into a complex hum. You feel lighter, more attuned and quietly satisfied with the knowledge that, at least for today, you can navigate not just survival, but culture, in a city that rewards attention as much as action. The sun dips lower, and shadows stretch across Rome, signaling that the day is slowly winding toward evening. But the city never truly sleeps. Your attention shifts to another pressing concerning fire, night watch, and the constant, quiet anxiety of urban life. Streets that seemed navigable by day become more treacherous as light fades, and you realize that Rome's dangers evolve with the clock. You glance up and see faint smoke curling from rooftops. Fires are a perpetual threat in the densely packed city. A mainstream historical fact: Rome has experienced catastrophic urban fires throughout its history, prompting the creation of organized niche groups and rudimentary firefighting methods. You notice men carrying buckets, organized in lines, moving purposefully toward a small blaze in the distance. Survival here isn't just about avoiding accidents. It's about recognizing hazards before they reach you. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some Romans used vinegar or even blankets to smother flames, while others supposedly employed teams of slaves as impromptu fire brigades. You picture yourself wielding a damp cloth against a blazing shop front and shiver, aware that courage alone might not be enough. Historians still argue whether Rome's fire prevention methods were effective or mostly symbolic, intended to reassure citizens more than actually stop destruction. Watching the careful, chaotic effort unfold, you suspect a little of both. Efficiency exists in theory, but practice relies heavily on coordination, luck, and rapid improvisation. You continue down a narrow street, noting the wooden balconies, overhanging eaves, and tightly packed homes. All perfect tinder if a spark lands in the wrong place. The street is quieter than earlier, but shadows conceal other hazard signs: stray animals, lingering carts, and the occasional pickpocket. Being alert becomes instinctual, almost second nature. The night watch appears at intervals. Groups of men carrying torches, shouting warnings, and checking the streets for trouble. They are visible authority, but also fallible. You keep a respectful distance, aware that interacting unnecessarily could draw attention, or, worse, misinterpretation. Observing from the edges is safer than becoming part of the display. You notice a small bucket brigade passing through an alley. Each person moves with rhythm, tossing water in measured amounts, their expressions a mix of concentration and mild panic. You watch silently, livelihoods impressed at the combination of coordination and improvisation. It's both organized and fragile, a delicate ballet that fails spectacularly if one person slips. As darkness settles, you also notice torches, lanterns, and small oil lamps beginning to glow. Light is precious in the city, and those who control it gain both practical and symbolic power. You step carefully, shadows stretching unnervingly, aware that obstacles and dangers are easier to misjudge in dim illumination. A light joke surfaces in your thoughts. The city's night watch might have been the original version of security theater. They're brave, coordinated, and essential, yet any fire or theft reminds everyone that human vigilance has limits. You smirk faintly, knowing humor is a survival tool as much as caution. Moving onward, you feel the city's nocturnal rhythm quieter than midday, but with tension just below the surface. Fires can ignite, carts still rumble, and missteps carry higher risk. You navigate carefully, muscles relaxed but alert, aware that night introduces a different kind of challenge than day, one where observation and discretion may be the difference between minor inconvenience and catastrophe. By the time you reach a relatively quiet intersection, you've internalized another layer of survival awareness. Changes shape with time, and preparation extends beyond meals, money, and baths. Rome's pulse now feels more intimate, its dangers personal. You inhale slowly, letting the night air fill your lungs. understanding that vigilance is a constant companion even as you try to blend into the softer glow of evening. Night deepens, and you realize that surviving Rome isn't just about daylight hazards. It's about understanding what people do after the sun sets. The city transforms. Streets quiet somewhat, but not entirely. Nightlife is more subtle, more shadowed, and full of its own hidden risks and routines. You feel the thrill of being awake when many others retreat indoors, a sense of cautious liberation tempered by awareness. Street vendors linger longer now, their torches casting flickering light over dried figs, nuts, and bread. You notice which vendors are closing, which are bargaining for last-minute sales, and which seem to thrive in the dim glow. A mainstream historical fact. Many Romans preferred to buy certain foods or goods late in the day because prices could drop as merchants sought to offload stock. You nod to yourself. Timing matters everywhere in this city, even at the smallest level of commerce. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some streets were known for evening entertainment that wasn't exactly legal. Small games of chance, street performances with a touch of mischief, and unofficial storytelling circles. You imagine ducking in and listening, realizing that the Romans loved a little harmless chaos even under torchlight. Historians still argue whether these nighttime activities were subversive forms of rebellion or just playful extensions of daily life. From your careful observation, it seems to be a mixed structure and mischief coexist in deliberate balance. Learning to recognize the difference could keep you out of trouble, or at least make you a more informed observer. You walk past a small alley where laughter and low conversation signal a makeshift tavern. Lamps glow warmly, silhouettes shifting behind wooden shutters. Wine, food, and company attract those seeking respite from the day's labor. You consider slipping inside, but hesitate. Visibility, reputation, and attention are all currencies at night. Even a casual misstep can make you the subject of gossip. Or worse, a group of men pass carrying baskets of roasted chestnuts, tossing a few coins to a child who has been performing tricks nearby. You notice the ritual of exchange, the way small acts of generosity or recognition maintain social harmony. You realize survival here is as much about noticing micro-interactions as avoiding large hazards. Footsteps echo from nearby buildings. Romans often sleep in crowded quarters. Sound carries. You catch snippets of conversation, arguments, whispers, jokes. Privacy is scarce, and discretion is essential. You adjust your pace, staying aware but unobtrusive, blending into the flow of the evening. The flicker of torches creates shadows that move and stretch, sometimes appearing like threats where there are none. Your mind plays little tricks, but experience teaches you to trust observation over instinct alone. Danger exists, but the majority is misperception. Survival in this city is as much about reading cues as avoiding harm. A subtle joke occurs. Walking at night in Rome is like a live-action shadow game. You're part spy, part acrobat, part cautious pedestrian. You smile faintly, appreciating your own growing adaptability. By the time you reach a small square, the chaos of the day has softened into a rhythm of observation, awareness, and careful interaction. Vendors are packing up. Occasional laughter punctuates the night, and faint scents of roasted food linger in the cool air. You feel a quiet satisfaction the city's nocturnal side is less frantic but still demanding, and you've navigated it with subtlety and care. The lesson settles in Rome. Awareness isn't just a daytime skill. Night demands the same attentiveness, but with softer, subtler hazards and a heightened need for discretion. You breathe deeply, letting the cool air settle, nerves still primed from the day's lessons, and move forward, knowing survival requires flexibility, patience, and observation no matter the hour. You leave the square, stepping lightly on even stones now slick with dew, and realize that Rome at night is a lesson in subtlety. Sounds travel differently in darkness, shadows stretch deceptively, and every gesture can be misread. Survival becomes less about brute force and more about perception, anticipation, and quiet navigation. You pass a narrow alley where a group of youths huddle around a small fire, their laughter crackling along with the flames. A mainstream historical fact: informal street gatherings like this were common in Roman neighborhoods, often serving as venues for gossip, storytelling, and minor transactions. You observe quietly, noting gestures, glances, and whispered commentary. The social map is invisible but very much alive. A quirky tidbit enters your mind. Some Romans were rumored to carry small bells or rattles at night, supposedly to ward off spirits or announce presence to strangers. You imagine jingling along the streets, part superstition, part self-preservation, and suppress a smile. You decide observation is less conspicuous than ornamentation. Historians still argue whether these small rituals genuinely reflected spiritual belief or were more about social signaling and safety. From your current vantage, both interpretations seem plausible. People act with layers of intention: practical, performative, and protective, creating a complex web you must learn to navigate. A faint smell of smoke drifts from a nearby hearth. You notice that residents often maintain small fires through the night, both for warmth and to deter unwanted intruders, human or animal. You adjust your pace to stay in the dim glow where visibility is better, keeping aware of open doorways and narrow passages. A light joke drifts through your thoughts. Walking at night in Rome, you're part detective, part acrobat, and part amateur anthropologist. Each step requires judgment, each shadow a test, and each sound a potential clue. You move deliberately, muscles relaxed but senses alert. Passing a fountain, you pause briefly to drink, careful to stay visible but not draw attention. Water is refreshing, but also a reminder of Roman infrastructure. Aqueducts, cisterns, and fountains supply life and define social spaces. Even a simple sip becomes a small negotiation with urban design and communal norms. You notice a man quietly pocketing a coin he just dropped. Theft, you remind yourself, is not uncommon, especially at night. Quick eyes, discreet movement, and awareness of your surroundings remain as crucial as any physical skill. Survival is as much about intelligence as stamina. Street cats slink through shadows, ignoring humans unless approached. Their small, deliberate movements remind you that life in Rome continues at multiple levels: human, animal, and spiritual, all intersecting in shared spaces. You sidestep one silently, marveling at the quiet coordination of the city's tiniest residents. By the time you reach a quieter courtyard, the lessons of night have settled in your mind. Observation, discretion, and adaptability are essential. The city is alive, unpredictable, and layered with rituals, hazards, and small interactions that could make or break an evening. You inhale the cool air, feeling a subtle confidence. You are no longer a passive visitor, you are an active participant in Rome's nocturnal rhythm. As you continue deeper into the quieter residential streets, your attention shifts to another constant of Roman lifing: the presence and labor of slaves. You can't avoid noticing them. They move with precision, efficiency, and often invisible authority, shaping the rhythms of daily existence while rarely claiming recognition. Observing them is both unsettling and enlightening. A mainstream historical fact: slavery in Rome is integral to society. Slaves work in households, workshops, markets, and even administrative offices. Their labor underpins wealth, comfort, and even small conveniences for citizens. Walking past a household, you notice two slaves carrying water jars into the kitchen, their movements synchronized, faces set in concentration. It's easy to forget in passing how much the city relies on invisible hands. A quirky tidbit drifts through your thoughts. Some slaves were highly educated, serving as tutors, scribes, or advisors. They wielded influence far beyond their apparent social status, sometimes subtly guiding the decisions of their masters. You imagine overhearing a household strategy meeting and realizing the smartest person in the room is technically property, a paradox that makes you smirk quietly. Historians still argue whether slaves' everyday agency fundamentally challenged social structures or simply operated within them. Watching, You suspect its both power exists, but it is constrained, hidden, and dependent on the perceptions of others. Understanding these nuances, even as a passerby, feels critical to navigating Rome without error. You notice a slave preparing a lamp for the evening, oil carefully poured, wick adjusted with precision. The glow will guide the household after dark, warding off accidents and maintaining a semblance of order. You marvel at the quiet responsibility, knowing that failure here could cause damage, scandal, or worse. In another courtyard, a small group of slaves sweeps streets, collects refuse, and murmurs under their breath. You realize the patterns of labor are constant, predictable, and essential. Their efficiency is something to admire silently. You make a mental note. Subtle observation is a survival skill, and noticing who does what, where, and when gives insight into the city's hidden mechanics. A light joke drifts into your mind. In Rome, some of the most powerful citizens you'll encounter have no freedom at all, and yet they shape the city more than anyone else. You chuckle softly, careful not to draw attention. Humor remains a secret alley. You pass a small shop where a slave tends to a loom, weaving cloth with rhythmic precision. The physical effort is obvious, but so is the concentration required to avoid errors. You appreciate the skill, knowing that quality work can sometimes grant a measure of favor, security, or small privileges. Survival here is about more than life. It's about understanding hierarchy, talent, and influence. Continuing on, you see slaves moving quietly through alleys, carrying messages, cleaning, or delivering food. They are everywhere, yet often invisible to casual observers. You sense the subtle tension in the airing power, dependence, and constrained freedom coexisting in intricate balance. By the time you step back into a slightly busier street, the lesson is clear. Slavery isn't just about subjugation, it's about shaping everyday life, sustaining the city, and demonstrating that power and labor take many forms. Recognizing these dynamics is crucial to moving through Rome without misstep, misjudgment, or social fakes pass. You breathe deeply, aware that observing, even silently, offers a subtle protection in this complex city. As you move through the dimly lit streets, your attention shifts to a different kind of vitality. Children. Their laughter, shrill and unpredictable, cuts through the ambient noise of the evening, and you realize that Rome's youngest residents are just as much a part of survival calculus as carts, merchants, or laws. Observing them teaches lessons in education, socialization, and adaptation. A mainstream historical fact: Roman children's lives are sharply divided by class. While the children may attend formal schooling with tutors, learning reading, writing, rhetoric, and sometimes Greek philosophy, lower-class children often learn trades from parents or participate in chores and informal education through observation. You watch a group of boys and girls racing along the street, balancing agility with caution, skillfully avoiding carts and stray animals. You marvel at how quickly they adapt to their environment. It's a survival training you never signed up for. A quirky tidbitting: some Roman children wore little charms called bulla around their necks to ward off evil spirits, a protective accessory that they rarely removed. You notice a small bronze charm glinting on a child's neck as they weave past you, imagining the tiny insurance policies they carry daily. Protection here is literal and symbolic, intertwined with superstition and practical caution. Historians still argue whether play for Roman children was purely recreational or also a critical socialization tool, teaching hierarchy, risk assessment, and cooperation. Observing these kids, it seems undeniable that both functions coexist. Their games involve strategy, cunning, and awareness, often reflecting the city's wider challenges. You notice a small makeshift classroom. A few children sit with a local tutor, scratching letters into wax tablets. The air is filled with murmurs, corrections, and the occasional sigh. Learning here is rigorous, sometimes harsh, but also a pathway to upward mobility. You think about how different education is for various children, and how survival strategies are often learned early through discipline and observation. Nearby, children mimic adult behaviors, trading small items, negotiating for sweets, or attempting to imitate market calls. You smile quietly. They are practicing the art of negotiation, social awareness, and minor cunning, all critical survival skills in the city. You recall the haggling with the olive vendor from earlier and realize that even the youngest Romans are subtly training for adult life. A light joke arises. In Rome, toddlers may be more adept at navigating streets than adults. You just have to watch carefully. You chuckle under your breath, adjusting your pace to avoid running into an enthusiastic child darting between your feet. Some children are clearly working, delivering messages, carrying bundles, or assisting parents with trades. Their labor is normalized, yet often hidden in plain sight. Observing, you understand the layered responsibilities that even the smallest citizens carry. Adaptation begins young, and awareness is instilled through repetition, supervision, and necessity. By the time you leave this lively street, the lessons of childhood and education are firmly etched in your mind. Play, observation, and early responsibility are as much part of survival as coins, baths, or legal knowledge. Children are both a reflection of Roman society and a reminder that adaptability is learned, often before one fully understands the city's dangers. You inhale deeply, appreciating the subtle complexity of life lived at every age. As the night deepens, your path takes you toward Rome's quieter corners, where markets close and the city hums with a softer, more secretive energy. Here, commerce has slowed, but opportunity, observation, and the subtle exercise of skill remain. You realize that thriving in Rome requires awareness even when the obvious chaos subsides. A mainstream historical fact: street markets, or fora, often operated into the evening, with some vendors extending hours to attract late customers or clear remaining goods. You notice the faint scent of dried fruits, nuts, and wine lingering in the air, along with the occasional clatter of merchants packing crates or negotiating final sales. Survival depends on noticing patterns and timing movement wisely. Slack vigilance can mean missed opportunities or missteps. A quirky tidbit: some vendors would leave small charms or tokens among their goods, either for luck or as subtle advertisements of skill and honesty. You pause briefly to examine a jar of figs, imagining a tiny figurine tucked inside as a marketing tactic. Practical, whimsical, and distinctly Roman. It makes you smile, noting how charm and performance intertwine in everyday transactions. Historians still argue whether extended market hours were primarily economic necessity or social ritual, but watching the ebb and flow, it seems clear that both are true. People gather not just to buy, but to observe, interact, and maintain community ties. You recognize that commerce is as much about social survival as about goods and coin. As you pass a small fountain, you see someone quietly exchanging coins for wine in clay cups. The transaction is almost ritualizing glance, nod, coin placement, and careful withdrawal. The intimacy of such small exchanges fascinates you. Subtle gestures define trust, understanding, and survival in the urban rhythm. Nearby, street performers entertain the lingering few. A juggler flips small objects with precise rhythm, and a musician plucks strings that resonate softly in the alleyways. You notice the delicate interplay of attention and distraction. Performers survive on observation, anticipation, and audience engagement. You realize that every profession in Rome, whether vendor, performer, or passerby, relies on subtle social intelligence. A light joke surfaces: juggling in Rome is not just a circus skill, it's a survival exercise. You might be clumsy, but the city rewards attention, timing, and balance in both literal and metaphorical ways. You smirk quietly, aware that your own attention to detail has served you well so far. You wander past a small group playing dice, shadows flickering across their faces from a nearby lantern. Gambling is common, informal, and often tolerated. The risks are social, financial, and occasionally legal, depending on proximity and oversight. Observing the games, you understand the importance of patience, subtle calculation, and reading human behavior. skills applicable far beyond the alley. Further along, you notice families settling near small fires or lamps, eating late meals, sharing stories, and quietly winding down. The contrast between bustling daylight commerce and these intimate nocturnal spaces is striking. Life in Rome is layered, multi-temporal, and requires constant observation to navigate safely. By the time you reach a slightly broader street, your senses are attuned to both the obvious and hidden flows of activity. Observation, patience, and subtle engagement have allowed you to traverse this quieter phase of the city with minimal risk. You inhale deeply, absorbing the layered lessons of evening commerce, social interplay, and urban rhythms that will help sustain you as night deepens further. Night has settled fully now, and the city's pulse shifts again, this time toward rest, reflection, and subtle nocturnal hazards. You notice that even when Rome seems calm, life continues quietly in shadowed corners, alleys, and homes. Awareness remains essential. Complacency is a dangerous luxury. A mainstream historical fact: most Romans slept in small, crowded quarters, often with multiple family members in a single room. Privacy was minimal, and sleep was both communal and strategic. Doors were rarely locked, and being alert even while resting could be crucial. You walk past a dimly lit doorway, hearing whispered conversations and soft footsteps. Even the act of resting in Rome is intertwined with vigilance. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind: some Romans placed small charms or written notes under pillows to ward off nightmares or bad fortune. You imagine a tiny talisman tucked beneath your own bedding, hoping the city's subtle threats stay at bay through superstition as much as observation. It's a comforting thought, even if slightly absurd. Historians still argue whether nocturnal rituals were primarily spiritual or a form of psychological reassurance, but from your perspective, both seem valid. In a city with unpredictable hazards, any strategy, practical, symbolic, or superstitious, that enhances alertness or confidence has merit. As you wander toward a quieter square, you see occasional shadows flitting between buildings, animals scavenging, servants completing late chores, or residents returning from distant errands. Each shadow requires assessment. Not every movement is a threat, but each carries the potential to disrupt if ignored. Your senses, now finely tuned, pass intention, distance, and risk in near darkness. You pause briefly by a public fountain, noticing how people collect water even at this hour, carrying small amphorae and jars with careful balance. Practicality and necessity outweigh fatigue. Survival does not pause for comfort. You carefully step aside to let a mother and her child pass, realizing that courtesy, awareness, and patience are subtle strategies for personal safety. A light joke drifts into your minding in Rome. Even a stroll at night is a lesson in diplomacy, timing, and street etiquette. You chuckle softly, aware that humor remains one of your few private comforts in a city that demands vigilance. You notice a faint glow from a distant tavern. The laughter and murmur of voices spill into the street, but the establishment appears selective, attracting only a few lingering patrons. You consider the balance between social observation and personal safety. Some engagement can teach, but overexposure may be risky. Small animals scurry near your feet, their silhouettes momentarily illuminated by flickering lamps. Rats, cats, and dogs are constant companions in Rome's nights, scavenging and reminding you that the city exists on multiple layers simultaneously: human, animal, and spiritual. Your attention must cover all levels. Finally, you reach a secluded courtyard, quiet enough for contemplation. The lessons of the night begin to coalesce: observation, patience, discretion, and adaptation are not optional. The city rewards awareness, adaptability, and subtle intelligence, and punishes carelessness, overconfidence, or distraction. You breathe deeply, feeling a mixture of fatigue and quiet pride. You've navigated the labyrinth of nocturnal Rome with alertness and minimal error. The streets remain alive, faintly illuminated by torches and oil lamps, carrying sounds of distant laughter, conversation, and the occasional shout and livelihoods. You know the night isn't over, but you also know that careful observation, patience, and respect for subtle hazards have allowed you to move safely through the city's hidden rhythms. The night stretches on, and you find yourself drawn toward the city's quietest but perhaps revealing spaces, temples, shrines, and sacred spots tucked away from the main streets. Even in darkness, Rome's spiritual heartbeat continues, a subtle presence that both comforts and warns. You move slowly, aware that while most people rest, divine observance does not. A mainstream historical fact: many Romans performed private or household rituals after dusk, offering small sacrifices or prayers to gods, spirits, and ancestors. You glimpse a faint glow from a tiny shrine tucked into a wall, the flicker of an oil lamp illuminating a figure in quiet devotion. You step carefully, noting how belief weaves seamlessly into daily life, even when the city sleeps. A quirky tidbit drifts in: some Romans believed that certain spirits roamed streets at night, guiding or punishing passersby depending on behavior. You imagine an invisible audience judging your movements and feel a shiver, not entirely from superstition, but from awareness of how much caution the city demands. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal observances were purely religious or served as psychological reinforcement of social norms. Watching a lone worshipper bow, you suspect it's a combination. Ritual teaches awareness, humility, and respect, blending spiritual devotion with practical survival. You pause at another small shrine, noticing offerings of breadcrumbs, coins, and tiny figurines. The gesture itself seems almost more important than the object. Romans hedge against misfortune constantly, with rituals that range from grand to subtle. You reflect on how these small acts of care and attention subtly guide behavior, reminding citizens to act with foresight, respect, and caution. Nearby, a soft chanting reaches you from a distant temple, accompanied by the occasional scrape of a strigil or the clink of small metal objects. Even the night carries ritualized sound, and you realize that the city's rhythms are layered with both human and spiritual activity. Awareness here requires listening as much as watching. A light joke drifts through your mind. Rome's nightlife includes not just parties and thefts, but invisible traffic cops in the form of gods. You smile quietly, appreciating the humor in survival strategies that blend superstition, routine, and societal expectation. Passing a small canal, you notice a lantern reflecting off the water, creating ripples that dance like spirits. The interplay of light and shadow feels purposeful, almost instructive. You keep a steady pace, blending into darkness while noting patterns of movement, risk, and land caution. By the time you reach the edge of a quiet courtyard, you feel a subtle confidence in navigating both the visible and invisible currents of the city. Observation, discretion, and respect for ritual and superstition have become part of your toolkit. The night is not a simple pause. It is a layered, complex environment demanding continuous awareness. You inhale deeply, aware that you've absorbed lessons not just about people, streets, and commerce, but about the intangible pulse of belief, ritual, and caution that sustains Rome even in the absence of daylight. Survival is no longer just physical. It is also social, psychological, and spiritual. The night is nearing its deepest hour, and the city feels almost like a living organism, breathing, shifting, and watching. You realize that navigating Rome now is as much about intuition as it is about learned observation. Every shadow, every distant sound, every flicker of light carries a message. A mainstream historical fact: Rome had night watchmen called vigils, responsible for firefighting, minor law enforcement, and street oversight. You spot a small group moving methodically through a nearby street, torches held high, chanting to alert the populace and ward off potential trouble. Their presence is reassuring, but also a reminder that authority, even at night, you can appear unpredictably. You keep your distance, knowing that recognition is better than interference. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts or show. Some vigils were also tasked with patrolling sewers and rooftops, making them part law enforcement, part urban spelunker. You imagine the absurdity and danger of a nighttime sewer patrol, shivering at the mental image. Rome's survival strategies are diverse, sometimes bizarre, and often unexpectedly creative. Historians still argue whether the vigiles were truly effective or mostly ceremonial, meant to give citizens a sense of security rather than enforce it fully. From your perspective, both views hold, meriting their presence deters minor infractions. But nothing can replace constant vigilance and awareness on the part of residents and visitors alike. You continue walking, noticing the faint glow from homes where families are settling in for the night. Children's laughter fades, shutters close, and lamps dim. The city is quieter now, but the potential for disruption remains. Small noises, the clink of coins, the scuffle of animals, the whispered words of a late passerby, are amplified in the dark. You step lightly, your awareness finely tuned. A light joke surfaces. Moving through Rome at night feels a little like a video game where every pedestrian is an NPC, some helpful, some indifferent, and some downright hazardous. You smile quietly, appreciative of the analogy, knowing that humor is as useful for morale as vigilance is for survival. You pass a small tavern, the door slightly ajar, faint music spilling into the street. Patrons are few and cautious, and the laughter is subdued, intimate. Observing without entering, you notice the subtle hierarchies and social cues, who speaks, who gestures, and who defers. Even casual leisure is governed by unspoken rules. Crossing another quiet square, you see the glint of small coins, dropped perhaps in haste or distraction. You pause to let them remain untouched. Night in Rome is both a time of observation and restraint. Patience, discretion, and respect for the invisible rules are as valuable as any coin or tool. By the time you reach the edge of the city's quieter neighborhoods, the full scope of nocturnal life has settled in your mind. You've observed, adapted, and survived with attention, humor, and subtle skill. Rome in the dark is a complex, layered environment. Shadows, ritual, vigilance, and social nuance all intersect in ways that demand intelligence, patience, and flexibility. The city hums softly around you, an organism that sleeps lightly, ever ready and ever demanding of those who move within it. You breathe slowly, knowing that each night is a practice, each observation a lesson, and each step a quiet triumph. Rome's pulse is constant, and tonight you've matched it. Dawn has not yet arrived, but the first hints of light brush the horizon, turning the sky a soft lavender. You feel the subtle shift in Rome's pulse. The city is neither fully asleep nor fully awake. This liminal hour offers a unique window into life. Quiet streets, subtle interactions, and moments of reflection that are impossible to notice in the hustle of day or the shadowed alertness of night. A mainstream historical fact: early mornings in Rome were bustling with bakers, porters, and street cleaners, preparing the city for the daily influx of people. You notice faint movement in the streets ahead, figures carrying bread, arranging wares, or hauling water. Even before the sun rises fully, the city awakens in layers, each person a cog in a complex rhythm. You step carefully, observing without interfering, appreciating the early routines that structure life in ways both subtle and profound. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thought. Some Romans believed that morning rituals, including offerings at shrines and brief prayers, could influence the day's fortune. You notice a man quietly leaving small coins at the base of a statue, bowing briefly before retreating into the shadows. It's a simple act, yet deeply emblematic of the city's layered approach to survival, spirituality, and social expectation. Historians still argue whether these rituals were primarily superstitious, social, or practical in purpose. Observing this small gesture, you suspect it's a blend of all three: personal reassurance, social conformity, and a subtle method of influence on one's surroundings. Small acts of awareness like this shape life in Rome as much as laws, commerce, or architecture. You pass a fountain where early risers draw water for their homes, noticing subtle hierarchy in how space is shared. Those who arrive first claim prime spots, while others adapt gracefully, waiting their turn. Even these mundane tasks reflect the city's lessons in observation, patience, and social skill. A light joke surfaces in Rome. Fetching water before sunrise might be the original version of a crowded morning commute, but with more amphora and less coffee. You suppress a smile, aware that humor continues to serve as a companion to vigilance and survival. You drift toward the forum again, now quiet except for cleaning crews and a few merchants arranging stalls. The statues seem less imposing in the soft light, but the lessons they represent, power, reputation, and observation, remain. You realize that you've come full circling from day to night to the cusp of morning. Your awareness has expanded, your understanding deepened, and your capacity for adaptation sharpened. The streets hum faintly with the first whispers of life, carrying lessons about commerce, hierarchy, ritual, vigilance, and the invisible webs connecting everyone. You feel both part of the city and slightly apart, a careful observer with the advantage of insight. Each footstep has been a lesson, each pause, a moment to absorb subtle social cues, each interaction, a practice in patience and perception. As the lavender sky brightens, you find a quiet courtyard to pause. The city feels alive, intricate, and surprisingly gentle in these early hours. You inhale deeply, letting the fresh morning air fill your lungs, carrying with it the scents of bread, stone, and faint dew. Rome is complex, unpredictable, and beautiful in its ordered chaos. You have survived, observed, and adapted. No small feat in a city that tests attention at every turn. The day is about to begin, but you have already traversed cycles of learning, hazard, and subtle triumph. Rome, in all its sprawling, layered glory, has taught you its rhythm, its rules, and its quiet secrets. For now, you can rest briefly, knowing that survival here is an ongoing, attentive practice, and that your senses, humor, and patience have carried you far. The city slowly brightens around you, and you feel the tension of the night ebbing from your muscles. The streets are quieter now, the earlier chaos softened by the gentle rhythm of early morning life. You take a slow breath, letting the scents of warm bread, dew and stone mingle with the faint warmth of the sun brushing over rooftops. The city is waking, but for a brief moment, it feels like you have a private audience with Rome itself. Your mind drifts over everything you've seen: bustling markets, crowded baths, narrow streets teeming with life, playful children, meticulous slaves, vigilant watchmen, and ritualistic worshippers. Each observation, large or small, has shaped your understanding of this ancient place, revealing the delicate dance of survival, awareness, and human connection. Even the smallest gestures, a whispered warning, a tossed coin, a flicker of light, carry meaning in this layered world. You feel a quiet reassurance settle in. Despite the potential chaos, the city's rhythm has a surprising logic. Observation, patience, and subtlety are rewarded. Humor, discretion, and adaptability are allies. You've navigated streets that could have been treacherous, witnessed rituals that could have been mystifying, and yet, step by step, you've matched the city's pulse. Now, as the first sounds of the day, footsteps, distant chatter, the splash of water, blend with the faint morning breeze, you feel the softening of vigilance into quiet confidence. Rome is alive, intricate, and infinitely patient. It teaches in whispers, in shadows, and in the bright light of simple observation. You close your eyes briefly, letting your senses drift over the textures, sounds, and rhythms you've absorbed. There's a gentle serenity in knowing that while the city continues its perpetual motion, you have moved through it with awareness, humor, and grace. Each step has been a lesson, each glance a clue, each pause a survival tactic. And now, as the sun rises higher, you feel the soft release of tension, a slow, satisfying conclusion to your nocturnal journey. You let your breath settle into a steady rhythm, your mind slowing alongside the city's gentle awakening. The lessons of observation, adaptability, and patience linger quietly, a reminder that awareness can transform even the most chaotic environment into something navigable, even beautiful. Sleep, or wakefulness, now comes with the comfort that Rome's pulse is understood, momentarily tamed, and that you have traveled through its streets, rituals, and hidden currents with careful attentiveness. Let the city fade softly in your mind, a mosaic of stone, shadow, and humanity, leaving you calm, alert in memory, and quietly at peace.